All right. We're doing diesel electric locomotive Aipd course. We're on chapter 2, section 2. Electrical maintenance and repair. General, the maintenance of electrical equipment involves with cleaning, lubrication, adjusting, occasional replacing parts. Cleaning is done with the blowing of the dust out of the equipment with compressed air. If the air is not sufficient, the equipment that can be dressed with a dry cloth one damp with the solvent. Parts of the lubricated according to standard lubrication orders. Adjustment replaces are made and as needed. Accepted procedure to maintain it. Specific pieces of electrical equipment are given with the section. The generator motors are discussed first, then the main power switch, voltage, load regulators, reverses, bearings, and sequence of the installation is testing. Although the coil, the communicator parts, or generator or motor, they are discussed separately for clarity. 218 aligning up with the generator with the engine and the proper operation of the generator sets up with required the armature shaft and the frame be aligned with the engine crankshaft. The air gaps under each of the pole be equipped equally spaced. The eccentrically at the coupling should be held to the minimum that directly affects with both the balance between the parts of the wear, the brushes, bearing of the air gap of the generators to be uniform with the plus or the minus 10% of the average under each main pole underneath the communicating pole from the front to the rear. The recommended place for aligning the air gap coupling into the engine of the generator. Air lining gap. The air generator installation permits to measure the air gap under each of the pole and coupling end. This is done with the long feeler gauge inserted with the commuter end. Since the generator is non-uniform air gap under the main poles measure that must be made under the tip of the pole piece and the radial clearance of between the edge of the fan and the generator frame for the be used. One point of the fan is used as the reference of the fan rotated, but the measures can be made between the point of the frame at the top, the bottom, and each side. If the difference is measured 180 degrees apart, less than 20 thousandths of an inch, an air gap is satisfactory. Air coupling, and the coupling is aligned with the indicator with the fastening to support the extending of the armature flange through the hole of the fan blade. Indicator is attached to the support. The indicator plunger provides against the face of the generator's fan. The dial of the indicator should be set to 0. The top position reading should not should be taken at 90 degrees apart. Allowance with the plus or minus of the 10,000th of an inch from the bottom, and the plus or minus of 5,000ths of an inch on an inch on each side, while resulting satisfactory alignment if it's coupling concentric with the crankshaft and armature shaft. Final operation, since any of the movement of the generator frame affects both the coupling and alignment of the air gap, the reading must be repeated both and after setting it only. The full length of the shim should be used under each of the generator mounting pad. No more than 3 shims should be used under each of the mounting pad. Only one shim not exceeding the 60 thousandths of an inch of thickness to the tapper of the thickness shim to make the air gap of the coupling of the conform to the specified limits after the generator is coupled with the engine. Place the generator frame so that the single bearing at the communicator end is located axially to avoid the thrust load of the in either direction. The generator has a float of approximately 3/16 of an inch between the outer race of the bearing of the housing and is coupled with the engine, and no clearance between the bearing of the outer race and the engine side of the housing. When the crankshaft is faced toward the generator must pass away from the engine possible without putting the end of the thrust of the coupling. And the arrangement provides for the maximum amount of the clearance between is required at the expense of the generator shaft, the engine crankshaft, that they will heat up the armature shaft and is forced toward the coupling end of the generator before coupling to the engine. 219 generators and motors inspection maintenance procedure for the same of the generator. Small motors both should be protected from dust, dirt, and oil fumes, smoke, and changes in the temperature. Figure 2728 and 29 show cutout views of the main generator, auxiliary generator, and traction motors. Standard maintenance includes inspection following the parts, engine starting, the contactor field, coil and leads, armature brushes and brush holders, communicator installation, generator, motor bearing assemblies, traction motor, axle bearings, axles, and pinion gearings. They are discussed in the next 9 subparagraphs. Removal and dust of the engine starting the contactor with the brush, lubricating with the bearings with the drop of oil. Never apply oil to the contact tips while inspecting the contactor. Remove the contactor to protect them from the dust, oil, medical particles during the inspection. Operate the contactor by hand. Silver contacts may be blackened. This does not affect the operation. They should not be cleaned. Field coils, leads are cleaned and repainted. Cleaning the windings and lead liquid cleaner destroys the protective coating, causing them to crack. They should be cleaned by a steady stream of air and necessary wiped off with a dry cloth. Also, clean, dip, and baking installation inspection, retape, painting, and field, coil, brush holder connections if necessary. Pull pinions at 250,000 miles, inspection armature shaft, cleaning, dip, and bake armature. Complete rewinding of the armature consisting of removing the bands, cutting coil leads and communicator, stripping off the coil of the core, cleaning of the repairing of the core, repairing of the communicator inserted, formed, and coils connecting the coils with the communicator, making the bar-to-bar circuits, testing, applying the temporary band, soldering, dipping, and the baking, applying with the permanent bands and banding machine holds of the armature in much same manner as lath. This shows the main generator, the communicator, the generator frame bolt, the main generator frame, the bolt, the AC stator frame, the rotor poles, the steel flange, the fiber brushings, the rotor nuts, the bolted connections, bearing cap, the bearing outer race, drain plug, slipping ring, brushes, studs, slip rings, plate, bolt, and the lead, terminal bolt, post, AC brush holders, guard, assembly sleeve, outer oil thrower, bearing cover, spleen nut, and bearing housing, brush holder, mounting the bolts, communicator brushes, and end housing. Your alternating generators, the brushes, small holders, end frames, bolts, piece of the frame, lock washer, key spacers, bearings, ball brushes, bearing caps, belts, bearing housing, armature assembly. It's really small. I can't read it, but that's that one. Your traction motor, communicator, inspection cover, the air intake, seal plate, cooling, air discharge, gear care, a support, pinion, axle side motor, pinion, housing, cap, screws, lockout, and bolt, gear, support, piston, suspension beer, cap, suspension bearing, the cap bolts, traction motor, connectors, traction motor, leaders, drain plug, communicator, end, suspension bearing cap, oil filter pipe, the felt wick, lubricators, and cab cleat, and lifting eyes. And it turns it well. We'll start out with the next sentence. An open ground circuit with an individual coil will be repaired without rewinding. Brushing and the brush holders are inspected periodically. Brushes should be moved freely, and the holders insulators must be clean. The lift of the springs, cleaning the brushes by raising and lowering them in the handles, brushing them being chipped in the show. Excessive wear will replace same grade of the brush. When new brushes are installed, they are sanded by placing the number 00 sandpaper under the brush and moving the paper in the direction of the rotation illustrated in figure 210. 210 shows the sandpaper brushing, the brush, the rotation arm, the cutting of the sandpaper in this shape, and the pulling of the sandpaper this way, and the rotation of the armature. If the communicator becomes pitted and cleaned with the fine communicator stone, the process is shown in figure 211. Be careful of the keeper of the copper dust from the windings after stone blow out of the windings of the low pressure compressed air. The communicator has the high and low spots with the signs burning. Placing the armature in a lathe, turning the communicator enough to produce the uniform surface. After the communicator has turned and undercate the mica, do not lubricate the communicator to be insulated with the insulated varnish. Insulated may be dipped and baked if necessary, but if may be needed a little spray coating with the insulation varnish. Avoid needless dipping and baking because of extremely material windings decreasing the heat transfer to ventilation. Since insulation deteriorates and surfaces tested first and determine if the repairs are needed, then again after the repairs are finished. This shows the communicator grinding, seating, and adjustment, resurfacing stone carriage of the mounting bracket, the mounting cap screws, inching of 5/8 of an inch by 11 inches traction motor. Inspecting, cleaning, repacking generator motor bearing assembly to preventing the bearing of the failures observed in the following precautions. 1. Remove the coupling flange of the blower fan wheel assembly using the pulley that does not apply with the load of the bearings. 2. Press the coupling flange blower fan on the shaft in such a way that the force is not transmitted to the bearings, prevented the bumping of the auxiliary generator shaft that could be damaged with the bearings. Do not use the reusing of the bearing which has been removed from the shaft at any time instead of replacing the new factory back bearings. Tolerances on the traction motor axle bearings vary slightly depending on the manufacturer of the locomotive. Whenever it is to be used on the road, the switcher serves the manufacturer maintenance instructions. Appropriate technical manuals should be followed with the bearings to be repaired and renewed. Whenever the traction motor is removed from the locomotive, the bearing alignment should be checked with the motor and reinstalled with the locomotive. The bearing shall show a sign of cutting and scraping it down to the new surface. If it is too badly worn, replace it with a new one. Before installing bearings, examine the journal of the roughness and cutting. If the bearings are hot, check the oil level vehicle in the oil cavity, examine the waste packing to make sure it has not fallen away from the journal and check the bearing clearance. The traction motor, axle, pinion gears are removed with the gear puller. Never heat the gear before pulling. Never use the wedges between the gear and the bearing cap. To prevent the damage of anti-friction bearings, remove the armature of the motor frame with the place it in suitable V-shaped support, then pull off the pinion gear. Never strike the pinion gear with the gear puller with a sledge or any heavier object. Armature is placed on the motor frame. The end of the armature shaft, the switch of the pinion gear is mounted on the board. The pinion gear, the taper, the reinstall the traction motor pinion gear, the first lane of the tapered portion of the armature shaft, the pour pinion thoroughly, remove any of the surface scoring, coated the tapered surface of the armature shaft with a very light coating with the bluing spotting compound. Place the pinion on the shaft as far as up that will go on tap of the hand. Rotate it slightly back forth and remove the pinion. Examine the ball surfaces at least 85% of the fit to be shown. Add the blue contacting of the pinion board of the armature shaft. Any of the hot spots showing the blue weighting that will prevent at least 85% of the fit will be removed. Record the position of the gear shaft when respect to the end of the shaft. Make a measurement of the use of the micrometer depth gauge is set in the frame as shown in Figure 212 to measure the point that is marked at the end of the point of the shaft point and the ensure that they are mounted exactly in the same manner after the heating. Actually, they use dry ice to pack take off the bearing, put the wheels back on. Figure 212 is the method of using the pinion gear advanced gauge. Heating the pinion is an oven or in oil until the uniform temperature of the required number of degrees above the shaft temperature. To check the shaft pinion gear on the temperature hydropyrometer would never permit the temperature of the pinion gear to exceed 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Make sure they advance to obtain using a dummy pinion nut which has loosened threads to permit the quick tightening. Use suitable spanner which wrenching the prop and tightening the nut before the pinion gear that cools after it is cooled. Remove the dummy pinion nut and check the pinion gear carefully, measuring the proper advancement, the mounting of the satisfactory, applying the type of the regularity nut. And when its wheel is removed, the truck is for any of the reason the gear should be thoroughly inspected. The common dimming limits for the axle pinion gears as given by the inspection procedures as follows. 1. Inspect the visual magnetic for the broken chip of the pitted teeth. Pinion axle gears should be condemned within more than 20% of the total working surface of the teeth are chipped or pitted, but the axle should be discarded with either one of the working surfaces worn to the point where the step is 1/32 of an inch deep exists in the root of the gear of the tooth, which contact the pinion ends. 2. Check the wear limits determined with the dimension across the tip of the tooth. Minimum allowable dimensions at the top. At this point, 3/32 of an inch of axle gears, 1/32 of an inch of pinions. 3. Light the scuffing of the characterized vertical through the tip of the lines and indicate the faulty lubrication, if not corrected, may result in ultimate destruction of the teeth, and heat generated as a result of condition may be caused by the damage to the armature of the bearings. When the gear is a hump, the pitch line of the steps of the root of the tooth is disturbed with the application axle lining maintained with other gears. They will operate with the interference, stressing the torsional vibration until new mating fitting. Operational under the abnormal condition may lead to fatigue failure of the gear teeth and shortening of the life of the armature windings. 220 cables and wires. Cables and wires must be inspected whenever the opportunity presents itself. This includes the insulated bus bars as well as the wires applied. Of course, the only exposed sections condition of the wires are determined by Megger and higher potential test. Cleaning should be done by the wiping of the rags using suitable solvent. If the solvent is used, all traces must be removed. When the cleaning is completed with the paint, accessible sections, particularly those exposed to dirt while the insulation is painting, if any of the section of the wire is found with deteriorate excessively because of the heater and consider relocation of the wire, reducing such exposure to the sense that heat is principally an enemy of isolation. 221 common coils. The most common method of testing the short circuit of the field coils is the growler test. Many of the repair shops equipped with the transformer or a growler for the purpose. The stretch for the growler is given with the 213. The growler is very simply effective method since no accurate electrical measurements are required. Apply the pressure to the field coil when it is being tested to approximately actual conditions was clamped in the frame. The pressure is not applied with the coil shall not affect on the test may be given the trouble of the short circuit. It turns when clamped between the pole and the tips and inside the surface of the frame. When the test is in operation after adjusting the knife switches the desired number of the turns of the transformer position the removable portion of the core without the field coil. Note the deflection of the ammeter, which indicates the valve of the primary current. Open the line switch and place the coil in this position under the transformer core. Close the switch. Reapply the voltage transformer. The ammeter shows the same deflection as before. The coil is free of the short circuit of the turns. If the short circuit has a much heavier current will flow into the primary coil with the transformer indicated with the great deflection of the ammeter. 222. Dipping and baking. Coils will have been operating 4 to 5 years should be dipped and baked as preventive maintenance measures. Some of the coils, such as the fields and coils, are dipped and mounting on their core. The armatures entire the assembly was suspended with the axis vertical communicator upper end of the lower end of the compound. Up until now, including the communicator, the varnish is hot with the coil armatures cleaned with the preheated in an oven before dipping. Dip for 5 to 10 minutes, drain for the 5 minutes, then place in an oven for about 6 hours, about 300 degrees Fahrenheit. When the armature is rewound and baked before banding after banding. 223. The communicator. When the locomotive comes in maintenance, the communicator should be touched with a canvas covered block. Remove the excessive formation of oil scum. The switch location of the work is done with the time of the monthly inspection. The excessive formations of scum cannot be removed from the canvas. If the use of the communication stone lightly applied with may require this permit operator to touch up the communicator lightly and maintain true service. This shows the growler test on a communicator having a smooth glaze. The chestnut color is satisfactory condition. Slight burning often occurs with the edges over the few bars due to the method of wiring. The high electrical efficiency. No maintenance is required of the type of the defect. And however, there's such a spot is deep enough to cause the brush to leave the communicator. If the communicator is dirty and smudged and presents a raised surface, it may be necessary to smooth the surface to bring to the concentricity by grinding. Whenever the communicator is concentric, the radii are all the same length and eccentricity, it may be discovered by clamping the dial gauge on the frame of the generator of the motor, rotating the armature band one communicator bar distance at a time. The dial gauge measures the thousandth of an inch variation communicator radiance eccentricity difference at 1/1000th of an inch when in a distance less than the brush spacing around the communicator may indicate the necessity of stoning for the bad burns. Extremely eccentricity may be necessary for the turn of the communicator on a lathe. Blackening of the communicators may be caused by oil, the bearings, the surge current, the struck brushes leave with the armature winding soldered over the ends of the communicator with the bars. The armature has been heated, overloading, and the solder has been thrown out, or the motor should be replaced. The flat spots of the communicator can be caused by the unbalanced armature communicator out of the round communicator bars to the high and to the low, and the locomotive driving wheels worn on one side of the flat spots. The wheels burns with spots on the communicator may result with locomotive power brake of the applied simultaneously burn edge of the communicator segments, indicating the winding of the cross contaction opening the armature. 224 main power switches. The main power switches must be inspected to flow the determined need the maintenance and repair, and inspecting the clearance of the all, removing the parts of the correcting excessive play, checking the contacts proper to the alignment and the pressure, wiping the action, wearing and adjusting the necessary, and the contacts are pitted and burned and pitted with the cleaning and replacing them. Tightening all electric connections, contactor mounting in the necessary. Item 3, figure 214 shows the contactor mounting bolt. Check the interlocking fingers and bars worn and burned and pitted areas, keeping the magnet in working order. This shows the engine starting contactor. They usually have a ground contactor, shunt contactor, power contactor, arc chute, wing nuts, mounting bolt, cell counting, connecting link, interlocking connecting tips, interlocking adjusting lever shift, after armature spring screw, tapered screw, pull shoe, cap screws, armature contacts, master spring screw, flexible and shunt and main contacts. 225. The voltage regulators. Two types of the voltage regulators are found on locomotive. The torque motor operated with the relay type. The torque motor on one sketch of the 215 is treated as follows: the discolorization spark is developed with the regulator communicator. Clean the regulator as soon as possible. Inspect the sector of the carbon rim. Assembly. Replace them if they are burned or worn, and check the piston. This also shows another regulator. Movement in the dashpot, if it sticks in the dashpot, must be overhauled, lubricating the cell. Sector bearings may the such the voltage regulator set the manufacturer specification. Poor regulation can result in the dirt in the dashpot, the communicator section, main shaft of the bearings, actuating so F bearings and relay voltage regulators. Service and checking the following: the contactors where the current coils connection fit tightness and the electrical connection for the tightness and good contacts of the coil resistor where the burns and discolorization adjustment should not be made unless detailed instruction for this type of relay is unavailable. 226, the communicator load regulator shown in the figure 216 has a few moving parts. Consequently, it's easy to keep in the service. Seldom needs attention except for the cleaning pipe connections must be kept in to prevent the oil leaks and air entry into the air system. If the pipes and leaks, replace the oil seals and operating system, cylinder, motor shaft, load generator, regulator timing, and control of the flow of the oil through the pilot valve. Item 1 in figure 216 to and from the regulator. 227, the reverser. Remove the reverser to dismantle the clean, lubricate and repair, and renew the piston packing, examining the pinions and racking, wear, cleaning, testing magnetic valves, renew and build and remachine contact segments, check and adjustment contact tensions, interlocks, inspect stationary contact shunts, and spring replace if necessary. Some of these parts of the reversers are pictured in figure 217. Intervals of the valve should be dismantled to permit cleaning and checking the replacing worn of the valve parts, disassembling the first of the remove the cover of the power pole plate and may be lifted off the valve in the steam stem pull. Taking off the large at the bottom allows the removal of the needle of the valve and spring. The valve may stick the leak or leak because of the deposit of the dirt. Good operation may be restored by washing it with a cleaner. If the valve still leaks, the seats are probably scored and if necessary to be ground then with a fine grinding compound. Testing valve leaks. To test the lower valve sheet, the leaks cover the air ports on the side of the magnet valve housing with the soapy water. If the bubbles form, the lower seats must be regrounded. The two upper valve seats pressed down on the bottom of the cover of the magnet valve housing. This has the same effect as those of the magnet coil where energized. While the holding button down again with the air ports with the soapy water, if the bubbles appear, the upper seat must be regrounded. If the bubbles do not appear while making them above the test, both seats fit properly. This shows the reverser, or the field communicator, or whatever. The reverser. The grounding valve seat. If the upper seat must be grounded with the code at the end of the valve stem, if the grounding compound, replace the stem with the valve housing, insert the screwdriver into the stop of the adjusting the screw of the valve stem, move it into the back of the fourth to ground the lower seat, insert the needle valve after the coating and if it involves the grounding compound, leave the stem into the housing, activate the guide of the valve, and then insert the screwdriver into the slot, move it to the back fourth. After both up and lower seats have been grounded to the valve of the housing stem, the valve should be thoroughly cleaned and reassembled, connecting with the 1090 90 psi air pressure. If an inconsiderable grinding either the still leaks, the valve seat is and so damaged with the new needle valve with the stem and seat assembles are necessary. Check both the needle valve and the valve seat stem for damage. Valve stem seats are improper. The valve blows through the exhaust port when the coil is energized. The valve stains is not seating properly. This may be caused by any one of the following listed in coordinates of the probability of occurrence. 1. Dirt of the valve seat. 2. The wake of the battery. A low voltage applied to the coil. This will sometimes give a sufficient pull to the unseated lower valve, but not enough to close the exhaust. 3. The dirt under the pole plate. 4. The valve stem will worn down to so that the pole plate strikes the core of the valve seats rarely until after the equipment has been serviced for several years. If the stem is found to be short, it can be slightly stretched and peened the shank. However, it is recommended the new assembly be installed. 228 batteries. The proper maintenance will prolong the life of the battery since batteries are ruggedly built and the basic properly mainly one paying for careful attention to the few important rules that are given in the subparagraphs of the files. 1. Keeping the battery component ventilated to dissipate the heat and screening openings to keep out the dirt, leaving the drains in the bottom of the battery compartment so the washing solution the drain water won't mar the paint or superstructure. B. Block the battery to prevent the movement. Cables should not be subject to crushing or rubbing with destroying insulation. C. Adjust the voltage regulator to keep the battery properly charged at high settings to increase the water consumption and heat. 2. Low settings to result in low specific gravity readings and lighter water consumption. D. In cold weather, add add in necessary battery water just before locomotive goes into service. Water, if in standing without mixing with the electrical light, will freeze and damage the battery. You can keep the battery clean and dry. If the soda used on the cover to be sure that there is none on it gets in the cells. Keep all the connections clean and tight. Normal hydrometer readings vary from 120, 1,280 and charged into 1,600 when charged. When the following safety rules are important, open the main battery switch when working on the battery. Keep the flames away, oil away from it, and do not lay tools on the top of it. 229 anti-friction bearings. It is applied to all ball and roller bearings to distinguish the roller from the sleeve of the bearing. If properly applied with a lubricated ball or roller bearing, need as much attention than the sleeve bearings. These are generally used with the main generator armature of the traction motor, the belt and driven auxiliary generators, exciter blow motors, nearly all electrical rotating apparatus each at the time of the motor's overhead. Overhaul their clean, inspect, and repack the roller bearings. Clean the bearing parts with the kerosene or other petroleum cleaner. Do not allow them to lie around and old greased in them. Do not use compressed air on a bearing within the main containing the moisture with the would cause corrosion of the racers or rollers. Do not take the cages apart and inspect the bearing parts of the flaking of the cracks or pittings and signs of the wears. Any excessive amount of dirt. Examine the side surface for the bore of the interface. Evidence rubbing of the turning of the on the shaft, outer race of the communicator, ending of the bearings, traction motor, first bearing on flange or thrust collar. To prevent corrosion, dip the bearing in SA10W mineral oil heated to 203 degrees Fahrenheit immediately after cleaning. Drain the bearing and wrap it in wax paper to keep it clean. Clean the bearing housing and adjust the parents with adjacent parts with kerosene or other petroleum cleaner, and after cleaning, wiping the housing dry, dipping the flingers adjacent parts in the SA10 milliliter oil heated to 203 degrees Fahrenheit. Drain. Store parts in the dry cleaning place only in shaft havings, 2 parts with one suitable for taking the end thrust and clamped. Rigidly take this thrust and the other must be free to an end of movement which results from expansion or contraction of the shaft when temperature changes. 230. Sequence testing. Electrical testing instructions are issued by the manufacturer for each of the group of locomotives. These tests must be followed accurately with no attempt to adopt solutions. For the following discussion, the typical testing procedure will merely test what is usually done while it is done. Why it is done. The operating sequence of shutdown control circuits can be tested by the battery voltage by mainly moving the interlockers and controls, disconnecting the generator first, however, so that it will not crank the engine, produce the power voltage, then test to keep them moving the things in mind. Starting circuit interlocks must be prevented with the armature contactors from closing until the field of the contactors have closed. The fuel pump must operate so that the proper pressure shows on the fuel gauge. The shutdown valve in the fuel line and functions with any safety devices such as low oil pressure with a switch, high water temperature switch, according with the wire. In each of the individual cases, interlock between the throttle and reverser, those in the fan motor current circuits and the shutter controls circuits must frequent properly. Any auxiliary equipment such as sanders must operate with the traction motor field. Shunting of the transition must occur at the proper time and sequence. Whales, slip relays, ground relays, etc. must be given. Give proper protection, turn on the alarm and the indicator lights. Any replaced traction motor must be checked for proper direction of the rotation and direction of the field connections. 231. Insulation testing. To detect any weakness within the which cause breakdown of the surface, insulation should be tested periodically at voltage excessive with the normal operation of the voltage, and any defects must be removed before the failure occurs in the en route. The insulation tests are either resistant test or dielectric test. Resistant test point to the presence of the moisture, the grease, the carbon dirt that may cause grounding. The false indications measures the failures due to the breaker voltage insulation. The adequate for the low voltage control of the circuit with it operates about 75 volts control circuit should be kept free from the grounds. Although the high insulation resistance does not necessarily indicate the high dielectrical non-conducting strength, low insulating resistance does not indicate low dielectrical strength. The control circuit of the new locomotive should have the resistance of 1 mega ohm. The locomotives in service should not fall less than 1/2 of this value. Important the feature of the testing comparison of the readings taken under the certain similar conditions at various times. The wide variations appear in service successful readings made with under approximately the same conditions of the temperature, dryness, and the cause shall be determined. The recommended minimum merger reading for the reading of the power of the circuit of either the main generator apparatus plus the communication field of the traction motor is 1 mega ohm at 75 degrees Fahrenheit. If the windings of the part of the windings are oil and water soaked, the damage to the parts of the shell be removed, and regardless of the merger reading, insulation resistance of the windings varies the greatly humidity and temperature as the approximation insulation resistance of the DC motors has the very 25 degrees Fahrenheit rise in the temperature because of the temperature of the winding contact may be measured accurately in the shops. It is recommended that the apparatus be permitted to reach the room temperature before insulation resistance is measured. Dielectrical test once a year whenever the installation of the apparatus has been repaired. Dielectrical tests of not less than 1 minute duration should be made on the main power circuits. It is important that the equipment can be clean and dirty and checked with the merger before making the test. High voltage should not be applied with unless the insulation and resistance measures at least 1 mega ohm. When the motors or generators are clean and dry and cool in about 77 degrees Fahrenheit, it's considered good practice to insist on 1 mega ohm or more before applying the insulation testing in the electrical machinery. For these electrical equipment, the major reading should be taken at 30 degrees second period or longer. If the reading is constant or rises steadily with continual application of the measure voltage, the insulation considered sound and can be safely tested. If the reading is unsteady and rises and falls successfully with a steady application of the measure voltage, it usually leaks, as that the leakage path may represent the cause of the dirt and the moisture. Further, with cleaning of the drying will necessary. The test should lead to be securely connected with the circuit before the power is applied to the test box. To avoid surges with the power connected, the voltage from the test box may be varied smoothly in both when increased with the decreasing setting to avoid surges. See the test box. A test box measures the voltage amperage of any of the unit of the condition connected to it. When making the test, guarding against the damping of the test box, setting of the application removal of the test potentials may result in surges as much as 100% or more than the intended tested voltage. Excessively burned contacts of the contact tips on the test box may result in an undesirable fluctuation in test of the voltage. Test box have been fixed indefinite. Secondary steps of the set of voltage are certain, and producing surging in the primary voltage cannot be smoothly controlled from the 0 to the maximum. The most effective and expensive modification for the test of the box at 1.5 to 5 kilovolt amperes or capacity can be made adding a variac or trade name the variable auto transformer to the primary winding. A variac has the capability of varying the voltage smoothly without the steps resulting in particularly no surging of the voltage. You use the variac connect the testing lead to the machine circuit that has been tested before applying the power to the test box. Then raise the voltage and test the voltage with the variac. Hold for the prescribed time, then lower the voltage to 0. The variac before removing the power and disconnect the test leads. 232 summary. To operate the properly generated armature shaft frame must be lined with the engine crankshaft. The air gap space must be equal under the pressure of the main pole. Under each of the communication poles from the front to the rear, the generator requires the same maintenance as the motor. Among these things are the inspection of the generator of the motor at the engine of the starting contactor, field windings, lead, armature brushes, brush holders, communicator, insulation bearings, assemblies. During route and maintenance, cable and windings are cleaned and painted, and coils, armatures are cleaned, dips and baked, and main power switches checked for proper alignment and wear and burning for the pit. Electrical circuits are tested to ensure the connections for all are correct. Insulation resistant testing indicated the presence of moisture, dirt, and grease that can cause insulation failures, even though nothing is wrong with the insulation. Cleaning lubricated the voltage regulator, replacing the worn to ensure the regulator is set. The manufacturer specification load regulators also need regular cleaning as well as tightening of the connections, replacing of the seals, and preventing the oil leak. Clean care of the reversers, including the renew piston, packing, adjusting the contacts, interlocking, maintenance of the magnet valves is also important. The battery should be kept in clean and dry and should be blocked to prevent movement in cold weather. Add battery water to just before the locomotive goes into service. The hydrometer reading should be verified between 1,280 to 1,600. Clean the bearings of bearing parts such as housing of the kerosene and other petroleum cleaner. Inspect the repack of the bearings. Replace them if necessary. When the bearing is removed, mark it to be replaced in the slot of which it was taken, following the manufacturer's instruction closely. For the testing of locomotive electrical equipment, do not attempt to make the substitution and to take shortcuts. Test insulation periodically and all remedial defects to avoid failures en route. Section 3, troubleshooting.